On a quiet winter evening, when the world outside is softened by blankets of snow, there's a simple ritual that has unfolded for centuries. A handful of white crystals tossed across a frozen path, a father or mother stepping outside with a bag of salt, sprinkling it carefully along the walkway so that no one slips. It seems so ordinary, almost forgettable. But if we pause and look closer, we realize there's a hidden magic in this act. Tonight, let us drift into the secret world of salt and ice, where chemistry whispers stories older than memory itself. A quiet winter night. The first thing you notice on a winter night is the silence. Snow has a way of covering the earth in a blanket, muting the usual noises of life. Even the sound of cars seems softened, as though the world itself has taken a deep breath and slowed its heartbeat. Under the glow of a street lamp, the snowflakes fall like tiny sparks drifting from the sky. And in that hush, every detail becomes magnified. The crunch under your boots, the visible breath in the air, the sparkle of ice along the sidewalk. But beneath that beauty lies danger. Ice forms in thin layers, invisible at times, waiting for the weight of an unsuspecting foot. We've all seen or felt that sudden slip, when balance disappears and the ground feels like glass. It's humbling, isn't it? How something so delicate and clear can bring us crashing down. That's why, in neighborhoods across the world, people scatter salt across their driveways and steps. At first glance, it looks like nothing, just grains against a sea of white. Yet those tiny crystals hold the power to transform the ground beneath us. It's in these quiet hours, when the world is hushed, that the smallest details speak the loudest. A grain of salt, something we usually scatter across food, without thought, becomes a savior for travelers and children. That's the strange thing about life. Sometimes the most ordinary things hold the greatest power, but we only notice them when the world slows down. Salt doesn't roar, it doesn't shine, it simply dissolves, quietly rewriting the rules of nature. And once you see it, you can't help but wonder what else hides in the everyday. The night feels like it's holding a secret. The lamps glow against the falling snow, and the frost glitters like a kingdom of glass. Yet with every handful of salt tossed down, the kingdom begins to change. The hard surfaces soften, the ice shrinks away, retreating as though something invisible is whispering, "It's time to let go." Could it be that this small act of scattering salt is a reminder of how even in the coldest times, change is always possible? That's the thought that begins to unfold. And as you take in the stillness of the winter night, another question begins to form in your heart. What exactly is happening in those moments when salt meets ice? It looks like nothing more than melting snow, but the truth is far stranger and far more beautiful than it first appears. The first snowfall on the streets. When the first snowfall arrives, it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels magical. Streets that were once dull and grey suddenly shimmer like a dreamscape. Children press their faces against frosted windows, waiting for the moment they can run outside and leave their footprints behind. For a while, the world feels softer, gentler, as though the earth itself is tucking in for a long winter nap. But then the beauty takes on another face. The soft snow compacts under footsteps, turns slick under car tires, and melts slightly in the weak sunlight before freezing again as night falls. What was once enchanting becomes a hidden trap. A mother clutching her groceries, a grandfather stepping out to fetch the morning paper. Suddenly, their feet slide out from under them. The first snow has a way of reminding us that beauty can hide sharp edges. It's in those moments of sudden slipping, when our hearts race and our bodies fight to stay upright, that we realize something simple. We need help to keep walking. And so bags of salt begin to appear on porches and street corners, The white grains seem to mirror the snow, but they carry an entirely different nature. They are not frozen, they do not cling. They are the quiet guardians of winter pathways. As the first handful of salt hits the ground, there's no sound of fire, no dramatic flash, just a soft crunch. Yet within seconds, something begins to happen. The snow and ice look the same, but droplets of water slowly form, like tears on a cold cheek. The surface loosens. Steps become safer. People may not notice the science beneath their boots, but the street itself seems to sigh in relief. What gives salt this gentle command over ice? How can something so small persuade a frozen sheet to surrender? The answer is hidden in the very heart of water itself, in the invisible bonds that hold each molecule in place. A child notices something strange. On that same quiet evening, a young boy, wrapped in a wool hat too big for his head, stands on the porch, watching his father scatter salt. He notices how the icy steps, moments ago slippery and dangerous, begin to glisten with tiny rivulets of water. To him it looks like the salt is melting the ice with a secret warmth, like fire disguised in white crystals. He bends down, picks one up, and rolls it between his mittened fingers. The boy looks closer, fascinated. The salt doesn't glow, it doesn't feel hot. Yet the ice is shrinking away wherever it touches. He presses his mitten into the wet spot and feels the softened surface beneath. "How does it do that?" he asks. His father smiles but doesn't answer, letting the boy's question linger in the frozen night air. It's one of those moments when silence makes the mystery even bigger, more alive. The child knows there is something important to be discovered here. Sometimes it takes the eyes of the young to remind us how extraordinary the ordinary can be. Adults scatter salt like it's a chore. Children see the magic of a crystal that can fight the cold. The boy doesn't yet know about molecules or freezing points or chemical bonds, but he knows wonder, and sometimes wonder is the beginning of wisdom. He decides he must understand why the ice obeys salt's command. So he kneels closer, watching as tiny cracks form and water pools along the edges. He imagines the ice as a stubborn old friend, clinging tightly to its form, refusing to move, and then, with just a sprinkle of salt, that stubbornness softens. The boy cannot help but laugh quietly at the thought of something so strong being undone by something so small. And deep inside, he feels the stirrings of a story worth remembering. But the answer won't come to him all at once. To find it, he'll have to look beneath the shining crust, beneath the surface beauty, and ask a deeper question. What is ice, really? What holds it together so tightly in the first place? The shovel and the salt bag. The father's shovel scrapes against the stone steps, each stroke echoing through the quiet street. The sound is harsh, metallic, a sharp contrast to the softness of the snow around them. He scoops and lifts, tossing heavy clumps of ice aside. But the real work isn't being done by the shovel. It's in that simple burlap bag at his feet. The boy watches as his father plunges his hand inside, scattering another handful of crystals like a farmer sowing seeds in frozen soil. The salt hits the ground and spreads out, glittering under the streetlight. It looks harmless, but its presence changes everything. The shovel alone could not loosen the tightly bound ice, but the salt slips between the frozen crystals, interrupting something unseen. The boy notices how his father trusts the salt more than the strength of his own arms. The shovel can scrape the surface, but the salt goes deeper, working in silence. And isn't that curious? That sometimes the gentlest force carries more power than brute strength. The boy steps down carefully, testing each place where the salt has landed. The crunch of crystals beneath his boots feels like a signal, a kind of reassurance that the path is safe. He looks at his father, wanting to ask again, but holds back. Instead, he watches, sensing that the answer is hidden in the act itself. There's a quiet wisdom in scattering salt that goes beyond simple practicality. It's almost like a ritual passed down through time, whispered from one generation to another. The father straightens up, his breath rising in white clouds. He looks at his son and says softly, "Salt doesn't melt the ice because it's warm. It melts the ice because it changes what the ice can be." The boy tilts his head, not fully understanding, but intrigued. Change what it can be? How can a grain of salt alter the destiny of water? It seems impossible, and yet the proof is right there at his feet. And so the boy keeps watching, his curiosity burning brighter than the cold. The shovel leans against the porch, forgotten for a moment. The real story is in those crystals, the way they whisper to the ice, the way they bend the rules of winter. But to understand it, we must travel deeper, into the hidden structure of water itself. A simple question in the cold. "Papa," the boy finally asks, why does the ice melt when you throw salt on it?" The father pauses, looking down at the handful of white grains in his glove. He doesn't rush to answer. Instead, he kneels beside his son, showing him the salt close up. The crystals catch the faint light like tiny diamonds. "These little pieces," he says, "are not just decoration. They have a way of talking to the ice, of asking it to change shape." The boy blinks, unsure if his father is telling him a story or a truth. The man presses the salt into the frozen step, and they watch the ice begin to wet and soften around it. The boy gasps as though he has just seen a magic trick. But his father explains gently, "It's not magic, it's science. And yet science is full of wonder, isn't it? Salt lowers the temperature at which water freezes. It tells the ice, you can't stay solid here anymore." And so the ice gives way. The boy listens closely, his breath catching in the cold air. This moment between them is more than a lesson. It's a passing of knowledge, like a torch from one hand to another. The father could have dismissed the question, but instead he bends down, humbles himself, and shares the quiet truth. The boy feels seen, his curiosity honored, and in that feeling something within him awakens. He senses that the world is filled with secrets waiting for anyone brave enough to ask. The night continues to darken, yet the small patch of melted ice shines brighter under the lamp. It's as though the salt has carved out a safe place in the cold. The boy imagines that the ground itself is grateful, freed from the rigid chains of frost. His father stands again, brushing his gloves together, but the boy's mind is still racing. He feels that this simple question is the doorway to something much larger. For what is water, really? How can it hold together so tightly, then fall apart so suddenly? And what does it mean that something so tiny, something we sprinkle without thought, can command it to change? The boy doesn't know yet, but as the snow continues to fall, he feels drawn to look deeper into the very heart of ice, where the mystery begins to reveal itself. The hidden power in white crystals. If you hold a grain of salt in your palm, it looks so simple, just a tiny, pale speck, nothing more. But inside that speck is an invisible pattern, an arrangement of sodium and chloride locked together like dancers holding hands. To the human eye, it's ordinary, even boring. Yet to the hidden world of molecules, salt is a powerful stranger that can alter the entire rhythm of water's song. What looks like dust is actually a key waiting to unlock the frozen chains of ice. The boy rubs the grain between his fingers, feeling its edges break down. He doesn't know the words ionic bond or crystal lattice, but he senses there's something deeper here. He remembers how salt disappears in soup, how it vanishes in water without a trace. Could it be that the same thing is happening now on the steps? His mind is racing, piecing together the invisible puzzle. Even in the stillness of the night, his curiosity stirs awake. The father leans on the shovel, watching his son think. He doesn't rush him. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the ones we discover ourselves, not the ones handed down too quickly. He knows that the boy's imagination will carry him further than any textbook could, and in that moment the white crystals become more than tools. They become a story, a reminder that knowledge is hidden in plain sight, waiting for open eyes to see. All around them, the street glitters like a sky of stars. The salt on the steps mirrors the constellations above, both built on invisible laws of structure. The boy looks up, then down, noticing how the patterns seem to echo each other. Perhaps the universe is full of these little codes, these secret arrangements that shape the way matter behaves. He cannot name them yet, but he feels them, like music heard through a wall. And as the icy steps continue to soften beneath the salt, a new question rises. If salt can break the bonds of ice, then what are these bonds made of? What holds frozen water together so tightly, and why is it so easily undone? To answer that, we need to peek closer at the heart of water itself. How ice holds together. Imagine water as a crowd of dancers. When it's liquid, the dancers move freely, swirling, bumping shoulders, always shifting places. But when the temperature drops, something magical happens. The dancers lock hands, arranging themselves into a pattern, a crystal of ice. Each water molecule is like a tiny dancer holding two partners, creating a hexagon that repeats again and again, a frozen pattern that gives ice its strength. And yet, even in its beauty, this order makes the ground treacherous underfoot. The boy, still kneeling on the step, peers closer. The ice looks smooth, but when he runs his glove across it, he feels the ridges, the tiny grooves where crystals have connected. It reminds him of puzzle pieces locking together, each one finding its place. He thinks about how hard it is to break apart a puzzle once it's complete. You need to pry and twist to free a single piece. Ice, it seems, works in the same way. The molecules cling tightly, holding on to one another for warmth. His father explains in simple words. Water freezes when it slows down. The molecules like to line up in neat rows, and once they're in place, they don't want to move. The boy nods, picturing the molecules as children in a game, all holding hands in a ring. The more he imagines, the clearer it becomes. Ice is strong because it is united. And unity, he realizes, can be both beautiful and dangerous, depending on the moment. But the salt doesn't respect this union. When it touches the ice, it pushes between the dancers, loosening their grip. It whispers to the frozen water, "You don't have to stay this way." The molecules hesitate, their hands trembling, their formation shifting. The boy can almost see it happening in his mind's eye, the once rigid puzzle starting to fall apart. What had been solid and unyielding is now vulnerable. And this, too, seems like a lesson. The bonds that feel unbreakable are not always permanent. Even the strongest walls can be softened by something unexpected, something gentle, something small. Salt shows the boy that change doesn't always come through force. Sometimes it comes through a quiet influence, a tiny shift that changes everything. The secret bonds of water. To truly understand what salt is doing, we need to travel inside the ice. Imagine shrinking yourself down, smaller than a snowflake, smaller even than a speck of dust. Now, all around you, you see them, tiny molecules shaped like little triangles. Each one is a cluster of two small hydrogen atoms and one larger oxygen atom, holding hands tightly. The oxygen pulls them close, forming invisible bridges called hydrogen bonds. These bonds are the secret threads that weave the ice together. The boy imagines himself as one of those molecules. He feels the tug of hydrogen bonds like gentle magnets pulling him toward his neighbors. It is comforting, like being part of a circle of friends who refuse to let go. The molecules arrange themselves in perfect hexagons, leaving just enough space to make ice lighter than water. That's why ice floats, resting like a silver raft above the darker water below. It seems so simple, but it's also a marvel. Who decided that frozen water should rise instead of sink? The boy wonders if the universe had a kind hand in it. Now, when salt arrives, it disturbs this perfect order. The sodium and chloride ions slip in between the molecules, breaking their hand-holding grip. The bonds weaken, the hexagons collapse, and suddenly the frozen dancers are free again. What once was rigid begins to flow. The boy smiles at the thought. It's not heat that melts the ice, but a subtle rearranging of the bonds. A reminder that sometimes the structures we think are solid are just agreements waiting to be undone. His father nods, watching him piece it together. The salt makes it harder for the water to stay frozen, he explains softly. It lowers the freezing point, and so the ice becomes water, even when the air is still cold. The boy runs his hand across the wet patch on the step again, feeling the slippery film of liquid that should not exist in the freezing night. It feels like touching a secret the world has hidden in plain sight, and as he rises, brushing off his gloves, he feels a new curiosity blooming. If salt can change the very bonds of water, then perhaps everything in the world has a hidden weakness, a hidden key that can unlock it. But to see how, he must first understand why water freezes differently from everything else around it, why ice is different from liquid water. Most substances become denser when they freeze. Think of metal cooling. It contracts, becoming harder and heavier. But water, in its quiet defiance, does something strange. As it freezes, it expands, making ice less dense than liquid water. That's why ice floats, drifting like pale islands on lakes and rivers. Without this unusual behavior, winter would look very different. Lakes would freeze from the bottom up, life trapped beneath would die, and our world might be far less hospitable than it is today. The boy remembers watching ice cubes bob in his glass of lemonade last summer. They floated like little boats, and he had never thought much of it. Now, standing on the icy step with salt melting the frozen crust, the memory feels important. Ice floats because water molecules spread out when they freeze, leaving tiny spaces between them. And those spaces, the gaps between the molecules, are exactly where salt slips in. That's where the secret unfolds. The father explains gently. Ice is fragile in its strength. It holds together in a pattern, but it's not as tight as it looks. Salt takes advantage of that. The boy tilts his head, thinking about it. He realizes the salt isn't really melting the ice by heat. It's reshaping the rules of freezing itself. The more he thinks, the more it amazes him. Something as simple as a sprinkle of salt can change the destiny of water, making it flow when it wants to stay still. It's a strange paradox. Water becomes lighter when it freezes, so it rises to the top. This one property helps fish survive, helps lakes breathe, helps the planet balance. And yet it also makes our roads treacherous when winter arrives. The boy begins to see how fragile balance can be, how the same quality that saves life in a pond can send someone slipping on their front step. The world, it seems, is full of double-edged gifts. And as he looks at the frozen ground, the boy wonders if there are other secrets in the way nature holds itself together. Perhaps the key to change is not in fighting strength with strength, but in finding the one tiny shift that unravels the whole. The delicate balance of freezing. Every time water changes its state, from liquid to solid, from solid back to liquid, it's playing a game of balance. The molecules pull at each other, deciding whether to hold on or let go. Temperature tips the scale. At warmer moments, the molecules slip and dance as liquid. When the world grows colder, they slow and lock arms, freezing into a crystal. But salt enters the game as a trickster, changing the rules of balance itself. The boy listens to his father describe this tug-of-war. He pictures a seesaw in the playground. On one side sits the force of cold, on the other side sits warmth. Normally, when the cold gets heavier, the seesaw tips and water freezes, but salt sneaks onto the other side, adding weight where it isn't expected. The cold loses its grip. The ice, confused, lets go of its perfect pattern and begins to melt even when it should stay frozen. This idea fills the boy with awe. He realizes the world is not fixed, it is negotiable. Even the laws of nature have hidden doors, secret keys that change the outcome. Salt, in its quiet way, shows him that transformation can happen when you introduce something new into the balance. And he thinks maybe this is how change happens in life too, not always with force, but with a subtle shift, a gentle nudge in the right place. His father stands beside him, the bag of salt almost empty. The steps are no longer slippery, water glistens where ice once clung tightly. The boy notices how his father doesn't celebrate the victory, doesn't boast. He simply nods as though he knew all along that the ice would surrender. That calm certainty feels like another lesson. The world is full of hidden balances, and those who understand them walk more safely than those who don't. The boy holds the last grain of salt between his fingers, staring at it as though it contains an entire world. And in a way it does, for inside that grain is a force strong enough to shift the balance of winter itself. The child doesn't yet have all the answers, but he feels himself standing on the threshold of discovery. Salt meets ice for the first time. When salt first touches ice, there is no thunder, no explosion, just a faint crackle as the crystals settle on the frozen ground. Yet within that stillness, something profound is beginning. Each grain dissolves into the thin film of water resting on the surface, breaking apart into sodium and chloride ions. To the boy's eyes, it seems almost invisible, but he notices how the edges of the ice are already softening. It's as if the salt has whispered a secret that the ice cannot ignore, a secret that says, "You no longer belong to the cold." The boy kneels lower, brushing his fingers across the wet patch. It's not warm, not like fire at all. It's cold, yet somehow the ice is vanishing. He feels the paradox, the impossible made real before his very eyes. His father doesn't interrupt, allowing him to watch, to notice, to question. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is not answers, but space for wonder to grow. The child feels something stir inside him, a curiosity that is stronger than the winter chill. In the glow of the streetlight, the salt glimmers like fallen stars, each one with its own invisible power. The boy thinks about how tiny they are, how fragile they feel when crushed between his fingers, and yet how quickly they transform the hard, dangerous surface of ice. It makes him wonder how often life's greatest changes begin with something so small, so overlooked. How many tiny choices, like grains of salt, have melted obstacles in his own family's path without him even noticing. The father finally leans down, speaking softly. "Salt changes the rules, son. Ice wants to stay frozen, but salt won't let it." The boy nods slowly, as if tucking the words into a quiet corner of his mind. He doesn't fully grasp it yet, but he knows there's something powerful here, something worth remembering. He can sense that these grains hold more than just the power to keep people from slipping. They hold a lesson about life itself. As the salt continues its silent work, the boy begins to imagine what it must feel like to be the ice, to have your strong bonds loosened by something so small. It feels like a story of surrender, of transformation, of letting go. And that thought carries him deeper into the dance of dissolving crystals. The dance of dissolving crystals. If you could shrink yourself down once again to the size of an atom, you would witness a breathtaking performance. Each grain of salt that lands on the ice begins to break apart, releasing sodium and chloride ions like dancers entering the stage. They don't stay together, they drift apart, carried by the thin layer of liquid water that hugs the surface of the ice. This is the beginning of the dance, and it changes everything. The boy imagines these tiny dancers twirling, each ion pulling at the water molecules around it. The sodium ions, small and eager, attract the oxygen side of water molecules. The chloride ions, larger and heavier, cling to the hydrogen side. Suddenly the perfect lattice of ice begins to wobble. The dancers holding hands in a frozen circle start to slip apart, pulled away by invisible partners who weren't there before. The stage is shifting under their feet, and the performance has only just begun. His father explains it simply. Salt likes to be surrounded by water. It pulls the water molecules closer, and in doing so it breaks the bonds of ice. The boy pictures the ions as tiny guests at a party, stepping in between pairs of dancers and changing the rhythm of the music. The dance becomes messy, unpredictable. Ice, once proud and stiff, begins to lose its order. The boy realizes that the salt isn't destroying the ice, it's inviting it to move differently, to flow instead of freeze. Around them, the steps glisten with patches of dark, wet stone. The boy notices how quickly the change spreads. A single pinch of salt begins to affect an entire patch of ice, rippling outward like a secret whispered from one ear to another. He feels the weight of that realization. The smallest change can ripple into something much larger than itself. Perhaps life is full of these silent ripples, waiting for the right moment to appear. The boy's eyes shine with wonder as he imagines water molecules dancing with salt ions under the glow of the street lamp. He can almost hear the music, feel the rhythm. But another question stirs within him, quieter yet more powerful. What exactly is happening when the ice melts? What is melting, and why does it matter so much? And with that thought, the story leads him into the secret of breaking the ice's grip, breaking the grip of ice. Ice holds itself together with a strength that seems unshakable. The hydrogen bonds lock the molecules in place like a vast invisible net that stretches from one end of the frozen street to the other. But when salt slips inside, that net begins to fray. The ions wedge themselves between the water molecules, pushing them apart. Suddenly the tight grip weakens and the ice begins to crumble. To the boy, it looks as though the ice is simply melting, but beneath his feet a quiet revolution is unfolding. The father points to the step where water now pools, glistening like liquid silver. "See," he says, "the salt breaks the bonds and the ice can't hold on anymore." The boy crouches, fascinated, watching the water spread. He dips his finger into it, surprised at how cold it still feels. This is no warmth melting the ice. It is a hidden trick, a kind of molecular negotiation. The salt has whispered, and the ice has agreed to release its hold. The boy feels the lesson in his heart. Sometimes we cling so tightly to our patterns, to our old ways, that it takes an outside influence to loosen us. Just as the ice holds firm until the salt arrives, so too do people hold to their fears or habits until something new disrupts them. He doesn't have the words for it yet, but he senses that change always begins in the small spaces, in the cracks where light can enter. The silence of the night is broken only by the drip of melting water. Each drop feels like a message, each sound a reminder that change doesn't always roar, it often arrives gently, almost unnoticed. The boy listens, mesmerized. He can feel the world teaching him something beyond science, something about life about letting go when the time is right. He clutches the empty salt bag, sensing its importance in this strange lesson. And as he steps back to watch the last of the ice dissolve, another thought comes to him, bright and insistent. If salt can change the bonds of water, then perhaps it can even change the very temperature at which ice chooses to form. And that thought opens the door to the next mystery. The melting point drops. Here is where the real wonder lies. Salt lowers the freezing point of water. Normally, water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, a neat, predictable boundary between solid and liquid. But when salt dissolves, it disrupts the structure so completely that water needs to be colder than usual to become ice again. The boy's father explains, when salt mixes in, the water must reach a deeper cold, maybe -6, maybe -10, before it can freeze. And suddenly the boy understands why the icy steps are turning to water, even though the air is bitterly cold. He looks at the little puddles forming and realizes they shouldn't exist. The air is freezing, but the salt has changed the rules. It's as though the world agreed to freeze at one temperature, and salt came along to renegotiate the contract. The boy imagines a judge in a courtroom rewriting the laws of nature in favor of change. He laughs softly because it seems impossible, and yet the evidence is shimmering right there at his feet, undeniable and clear. The father nods. That's why we spread salt on the roads. It keeps ice from forming, or it melts what's already there. It makes travel safer for everyone. The boy pictures cars sliding without control, people falling, accidents waiting to happen. And then he sees how a sprinkle of salt can prevent it all. Something so small, so ordinary, has the power to save lives. It's a quiet kind of heroism, the kind we rarely notice but often depend on. The boy holds up another pinch of salt, feeling its rough edges. It doesn't look powerful, it doesn't even look alive, and yet it holds the ability to change the very threshold of freezing itself. He thinks about how often the world tells him he's too small, too quiet, too unimportant. But if a grain of salt can shift the laws of nature, then maybe size was never the true measure of power. Maybe influence works in quieter ways. As the last grains scatter onto the stone, the boy feels his question deepening. He knows now that salt doesn't melt ice by heat, but by lowering the freezing point. Still he wonders, what does it really mean for ice to let go of its form, to surrender its order, and become something new? And with that thought he steps into the next part of the mystery. A battle between order and flow. At the heart of ice lies a battle, a quiet one, but fierce all the same. On one side, the molecules want to remain locked together, frozen in their hexagonal embrace. On the other, there is a restless energy, a desire to move, to flow, to be free. This battle is invisible to the naked eye, but its results are written across the winter streets. When salt steps in, it doesn't fight the ice directly, it changes the balance of power, tilting the scale just enough so that the flow begins to win. The boy imagines the molecules as a circle of children holding hands in the snow. When salt arrives, it slips between them, breaking their grip. The circle wobbles, then falls apart. The children laugh and run free, scattering across the playground. The boy smiles at the thought. Ice isn't being destroyed, it's being reminded of what it once was, water, free to move and dance. Salt is not an enemy, it's more like a messenger, a whisper that says, "You can change now," and the ice listens. The father leans against the wooden railing, watching his son's imagination take flight. He doesn't stop him. Instead, he adds, "The world is always balancing between order and chaos, too much order, and life freezes, too much chaos, and nothing can hold together. Salt just tips the scale for a moment, enough to keep us safe. The boy nods, thinking of how this balance must exist everywhere, in rivers, in stars, maybe even inside people. It feels like a truth too big for one night, but somehow he is ready to hear it. The steps are mostly clear now. Puddles glisten where the salt has worked its quiet magic. The boy takes a step, testing the ground, and feels the difference. Where once his boots slipped, now they grip. He feels safe, steady, as though the earth has decided to welcome him again. And yet, he knows it isn't the earth that changed on its own. It was the salt, shifting the balance, rewriting the rules in silence. A reminder that change doesn't always come with noise, it can arrive in whispers. As they turn to go back inside, the boy looks over his shoulder one last time. The snow continues to fall, covering the ground in white once more. But now he sees it differently. He sees not just snow and ice, but a hidden struggle, a delicate balance between freezing and flowing, and in that balance he senses there is more to discover, water's desire to move. Water has a restless spirit, almost like a traveler, who cannot stay in one place too long. When it is liquid, its molecules slip and slide, brushing past one another in a graceful dance. They are free to flow, to reshape themselves endlessly, to adapt to whatever container they are poured into. This is the natural state of water: movement, flexibility, flow. The boy thinks of streams he's seen in summer, curling around rocks, always finding a way forward. That same life force is trapped now, hidden inside the hard walls of ice. Standing on the snowy steps, he imagines the frozen water yearning to return to motion. He thinks of how people, too, can feel trapped in routines, locked into patterns that no longer fit them. Inside, though, there is always that same quiet desire for flow, for freedom, for change. Salt, he realizes, doesn't force water to melt. It simply reminds water of what it already longs to be. The thought lingers in his young mind like a flame glowing faintly in the dark. His father notices his silence. "Water doesn't really want to be still," he says gently. "It only stays frozen because the cold keeps its hands tied together. Salt comes along and unravels the knot." The boy pictures those tiny bonds breaking one by one, and he smiles at the thought. Even in winter's grip, the possibility of movement remains. Ice is never permanent. It is just water waiting to remember itself. The boy bends down and touches the puddle again. The water runs away from him, slipping through cracks in the stone step, finding its path without hesitation. He whispers, almost to himself, "It just wants to move." The words feel true, not only about water, but about life itself. Every living thing, he senses, wants to flow forward, to keep moving, no matter how thick the ice around it may seem. And in that gentle realization, the boy feels a question press at his heart. If water longs to move, what exactly does the salt do to make that movement possible? The answer lies in the invisible chemistry that unfolds in the quiet spaces between molecules, how salt turns ice into liquid. When salt lands on ice, it doesn't melt it like fire does. It changes the chemistry of the water itself. Those tiny crystals, when they dissolve, break into two kinds of particles, sodium ions and chloride ions. These ions get in the way of water molecules as they try to hold hands and stay frozen. It's as if salt arrives at a tightly locked circle and slips between the fingers, whispering, "You don't need to cling so tightly anymore." And just like that, the bonds weaken and the ice begins to melt. The boy's father explains it simply. Water freezes at 0 degrees, but with salt in it, it can't freeze until it gets even colder. So when the temperature is just below freezing, the ice starts to melt instead of holding on. The boy listens, wide-eyed, picturing the molecules in his imagination. He sees them trying to freeze, only to be pulled apart by the salt ions. It feels like watching a wall crumble, not with a hammer, but with gentle hands undoing each stone. The boy wonders aloud, "So the salt makes it warmer?" His father shakes his head. "No, the salt doesn't bring heat. It lowers the freezing point. It changes the rules, so the ice doesn't know how to stay solid." The child nods slowly, realizing this is something deeper than heat. It's not about fire. It's about shifting the boundaries of possibility. That thought makes him shiver, though not from the cold. He thinks about the times he has felt stuck, nervous about speaking in front of his classmates, afraid to ask a question, worried about making mistakes. Maybe, he wonders, those moments are like ice too. Maybe all it takes is a small shift, a new perspective, something to slip between the bonds and remind him that he doesn't have to stay frozen. Salt becomes more than salt. It becomes a teacher. As he walks carefully across the wet step, the boy feels his boots hold steady. He realizes the salt has changed the very nature of the ground beneath him. And in that moment, he begins to sense something larger, that even the smallest changes can create new pathways where none existed before. The silent science of freezing depression. The father uses a quiet phrase the boy doesn't quite understand: freezing point depression. To the man it's a scientific term. To the boy it sounds like a mood, the sadness of ice when it cannot hold itself together. He imagines the ice sighing as the salt spreads across it, whispering, "I can't stay like this anymore." It's not destruction, not really. It's a surrender, and sometimes surrender is not weakness. Sometimes it's the beginning of something new. The father explains that freezing point depression means water must be colder than normal to turn into ice when salt is present. At 0 degrees, pure water freezes solid, but when salt is dissolved, the freezing temperature drops. That's why salted roads stay wet even when the air is icy. The boy pictures a thermometer sinking lower and lower, the numbers dropping like stars falling from the sky. He begins to realize that salt doesn't fight the cold, it simply changes the condition under which freezing can occur. The boy whispers, "So the ice feels colder than it really is?" His father nods slowly. "In a way, yes. Salt makes the ice need a deeper cold to stay frozen. Without that extra cold, it has no choice but to melt." The boy smiles, imagining ice shivering, unable to keep its form. It reminds him of times he's felt weighed down by worries until something, a laugh, a kind word, shifted the balance, and suddenly the heaviness melted away. The science of salt feels strangely personal. The sound of water dripping grows louder, like a clock ticking in the stillness of the night. Each drop feels like a heartbeat, reminding the boy that even the hardest states are temporary. Nothing is frozen forever. Life has a way of moving again, even when everything seems stuck. The boy breathes in the cold air, letting the thoughts settle in his chest like warmth spreading from within. And as he watches the salted ice fade into water, he begins to see how this quiet science keeps people safe. It's not only about molecules and bonds, it's about journeys, about the paths we take and how we find our footing when the ground is slippery beneath us. Why roads become safer with salt. The boy's father points down the street. Cars roll slowly, their headlights glowing in the falling snow. "Without salt," he says, "those cars would slide, people could fall, everything would stop." The boy imagines a road without salt, tires spinning, wheels skidding, people trapped in their homes. The salt, though, makes a difference. It carves safe pathways, melting just enough ice so wheels can grip, so footsteps can land steady. It's not perfect, but it's enough to keep life moving through the winter. The boy thinks about how something so tiny can save lives. Every winter, salt trucks roll through cities, scattering crystals across miles of road. Drivers may not notice the change, but they feel it. Cars stop a little sooner, turns feel less slippery, accidents become fewer. Salt doesn't make the ice disappear instantly, but it gives us a chance. And sometimes a chance is all we need to keep going. The boy feels a kind of quiet gratitude for the humble crystals that so often go unseen. He watches as a neighbor steps out onto their salted path. The crunch of salt underfoot seems to reassure them, a promise of safety. The boy notices how quickly fear can dissolve when the path is steady. He thinks of times when he himself felt afraid, like the first day of school, and how just one reassuring smile from his father made all the difference. Salt on the road is like that smile, a quiet support that steadies the steps of everyone who passes. The father looks at his son and says, "People have used salt like this for a very long time, not just for food, but for life itself. Without it, winters would be far harsher than they are." The boy thinks about history, about the people who walked these same snowy roads long before him. Did they also scatter salt on their steps? Did they also feel the same quiet relief when the ice began to melt? The thought makes the night feel larger, as though he is standing in a story that began long before he was born. As the sound of car tires fades into the distance, the boy wonders what other secrets these crystals hold. If salt can melt ice and keep people safe, what else has it done for humanity across the centuries? The answer lies not just on this quiet street, but in the long story of human history. The spark of human ingenuity. Human beings have always been storytellers, always seekers of solutions. Long before the boy's father scattered salt on icy steps, people discovered that these crystals could preserve food, heal wounds, and flavor meals. Salt was so precious once that it was traded like treasure, carried across deserts on camelback, guarded like gold. It was not just a seasoning, it was survival. And when winter came and ice threatened to trap communities in silence, salt became a tool of ingenuity, a way to keep life moving forward. The boy listens with wide eyes as his father explains this history. He imagines travelers crossing snowy passes, carrying heavy sacks of salt on their backs. He imagines villagers sprinkling it on frozen paths, watching in wonder as the ice softened beneath their feet. For them, salt was not just a convenience, it was a gift, a lifeline, a reminder that even in the coldest seasons, there was always a way forward. The boy feels connected to them, as if the crystals in his father's bag carried the weight of all their stories. He thinks about what it means to be human. Perhaps it is not our strength or our size that helps us survive, but our ability to discover these quiet helpers in the world. To notice that a tiny grain of salt can change the rules of winter, and then to carry that knowledge forward, generation after generation. The boy realizes that every step he takes tonight is built on centuries of human ingenuity, on the wisdom of those who came before him. The father smiles at his son's thoughtful silence. "We learn from the world," he says, "and we learn from each other. That's what keeps us alive." The boy nods, feeling the truth of it. The crystals in his hand suddenly feel heavier, as though they carry the weight of both science and history. Salt, once invisible and ordinary, now shines in his eyes as something sacred, something profound. He feels a quiet pride in being human, in belonging to a species that learns, adapts, and survives. And as they step back inside, the boy's mind doesn't rest. If salt has carried such wisdom through history, what else might it be teaching us? What other gifts has it given, hidden in its simple white form? As the warmth of the home embraces him, he feels the story pulling him even deeper toward the ancient path of salt and its place in the journey of humanity. Salt as an ancient companion. Long before science gave it a name, salt was already walking alongside humanity as an old companion. People carried it across deserts, traded it like treasure, and offered it in rituals as a sacred gift. It preserved food when there were no refrigerators, healed wounds when there were no medicines, and flavored meals when life was otherwise plain. In winter, it found yet another role, protector of paths. To the boy, this realization feels humbling. The same salt in his father's bag is part of a story as old as civilization itself. The boy imagines early people discovering the strange power of salt on frozen streams. Maybe it was an accident, a bag spilling onto ice, a villager noticing the softened crust. He pictures their wonder, much like his own tonight, when they realized these small white crystals could tame winter's grip. How many lives must have been saved by this discovery? How many journeys continued because of salt's quiet intervention? The thought makes him feel connected, not just to his father, but to every human who has ever leaned on salt for survival. His father explains softly, "Salt is one of the oldest companions we've had. Empires rose and fell around it. Roads were built just to carry it. Even the word salary comes from salt. It was once a form of payment." The boy's eyes widen. To think that the same substance he sprinkles on his food was once as precious as gold, it changes how he sees the crystals in his hand. What was once ordinary now feels timeless, sacred, almost alive. He runs his fingers through the bag, feeling the rough texture of the grains. Each piece suddenly feels like a fragment of history, a tiny story carried across generations. He wonders how many people before him stared at salt with the same sense of awe. Farmers, kings, travelers, children like himself, all part of the same chain, bound together by these humble crystals. The boy senses that he is standing inside a story much bigger than himself. And as the thought settles, he wonders, if salt has always been humanity's companion, what other roles has it played across time? What else has it given us beyond safety on frozen nights? The answer lies in its many uses woven into daily life long before tonight. From preserving food to saving journeys, salt's story stretches across every corner of life. In summer, it preserved food, keeping meat and fish safe from decay. In times of scarcity, it ensured survival through long winters. In medicine, it cleaned wounds, eased pain, and offered healing when little else was known. And now, in winter, it saves journeys, keeping roads clear, steps safe, and families connected even when snow tries to silence the world. The boy begins to see salt not as one thing but as many things, a quiet servant with countless gifts. The father tells him about ancient sailors who carried barrels of salted fish across oceans, ensuring their crews survived long voyages. Without salt, exploration itself might have been impossible. The boy imagines ships cutting through waves, men surviving storms because these little crystals kept hunger at bay. Then he looks down at the icy street and realizes salt is doing the same here, guiding travelers safely through winter. It is always there, invisible, yet indispensable. He thinks about journeys closer to home, the grandmother carrying groceries down a salted path, the neighbor driving on a salted road, the child running to school without fear of falling. Salt keeps all of these journeys alive, just as it kept explorers alive centuries ago. It is not glamorous, not celebrated, but it is steady, faithful, reliable. And sometimes the quietest helpers are the ones that carry us the farthest. The boy turns to his father. "So salt isn't just for food?" His father smiles, shaking his head. "No, son. Salt has saved lives in more ways than you can imagine." The boy nods, thinking of the many unseen threads that tie life together. He realizes that salt is not just something we use, it is something that has always been with us, shaping our paths. He feels a quiet gratitude that these crystals have been placed in human hands. And as his thoughts wander further, the boy feels another question rising. Who was it that first discovered salt's strange power? Who was the first to scatter it on ice and realize its hidden gift? The answer pulls him further back, into the footsteps of the people who began this practice long ago. The people who first tried it. The boy pictures a time long before salt trucks and city workers, when people faced winter with little more than firewood, heavy coats, and determination. Perhaps it was a farmer carrying salt to feed his animals, who spilled some onto a frozen trough and noticed the ice melting faster than before. Or maybe it was a villager, desperate to clear a path, who tried everything, ashes, sand, herbs, before discovering that salt alone could soften the frost. However it happened, that moment changed the rhythm of winter forever. His father tells him stories of old Europe, where people began sprinkling salt on roads centuries ago. Merchants carried it through towns, spreading it on cobblestones to keep carts from slipping. Over time, the practice spread from village to village, from city to city, until it became a winter tradition woven into daily life. The boy realizes that every handful of salt scattered today is part of a chain of human trial, error, and discovery. Behind every safe step lies a story of someone's curiosity. The boy imagines the joy of that first discovery, the wonder of watching ice retreat, of seeing a path clear where once there was only danger. It must have felt like magic, like a gift from the earth itself. He smiles at the thought, feeling connected to that unknown farmer or villager across time. Their small act of curiosity continues to ripple forward, reaching him now on this quiet street lit by lamps and falling snow. He realizes something else. Every discovery begins with a question. Someone must have wondered, what happens if I try this? That question changed everything. The boy feels his own curiosity grow stronger, like a seed sprouting in the winter soil. He wonders what discoveries might lie hidden in his own life, waiting for him to ask the right question. Salt is more than a crystal now. It is a reminder of the power of curiosity itself. And as he looks down at the melting steps, he thinks of how wisdom often flows like a river, from one hand to another, from generation to generation. Salt's story is not just about discovery, it's about the wisdom passed forward, preserved in the simple rituals of life. The wisdom passed through generations. The father hands the boy a small scoop of salt. "Your grandfather taught me this," he says softly, and his father taught him. It's not just about melting ice, it's about keeping those you love safe. The boy holds the scoop carefully, feeling the weight of more than just crystals. It is the weight of tradition, of care passed down through time. In that moment, he understands that the act of scattering salt is both practical and symbolic. It is an expression of love, a way of saying, "I will keep you steady when the ground is slippery." He thinks about how many hands must have repeated this same motion, mothers, fathers, grandparents, all scattering salt for the safety of others. Each one, in their own quiet way, contributed to the same story. He imagines a long line of people stretching back through time, each one holding a scoop, each one passing it forward. He feels part of that line now, as though by holding this salt, he has joined a timeless circle of care. The boy scatters his first handful, watching the crystals scatter across the step. He feels proud, even though the act is small. His father nods approvingly. "This is how we carry wisdom," he says, "not always through books or speeches, but through actions repeated until they become part of us." The boy understands. This is not just about science. It is about life, about remembering that the smallest rituals carry the deepest meaning. As he watches the salt melt the ice, he thinks of all the other rituals he has seen: his mother lighting a candle in the evening, his grandfather blessing food before eating, his father always locking the door before bed. These little actions may seem ordinary, but they carry love, safety, and wisdom across generations. Salt, he realizes, is part of that chain. It is both science and symbol, both chemistry and care. And with this understanding, he feels a final thought stir. Maybe salt has always been more than just a substance. Maybe it is a gift given to us to remind us of life's hidden treasures. The boy begins to see salt as something extraordinary, something far larger than the handful of crystals in his palm. The gift hidden in ordinary things. The boy stands quietly, his mitten full of salt, and feels a strange warmth in his heart. All his life he had seen salt as ordinary, something poured from a shaker at dinner, nothing more. But tonight, under the street lamp glow, he sees it differently. He sees a gift hidden in plain sight, a reminder that even the simplest things carry mysteries if we only stop to notice them. The salt in his hand suddenly feels like a treasure chest, its value not measured in gold, but in wisdom and wonder. He thinks about how often people overlook the ordinary: a grain of sand, a drop of water, a flicker of light, all so common, yet each containing entire worlds of meaning. Tonight, salt has shown him this truth. It has revealed how something so small can hold the power to shape history, save lives, and carry love across generations. The boy smiles, realizing that the world is full of hidden gifts, waiting to be seen by curious eyes. His father watches him quietly, recognizing the change in his son's expression. "It's always been here," he says softly, "but we only notice when we look closer." The boy nods, his breath fogging in the cold air. He knows his father is right. Life is not just about grand discoveries. It is about paying attention to the small things, the ordinary things, the things that carry silent power. Salt has taught him this, and he knows he will never see it the same way again. The boy scatters his last handful of salt, watching the ice melt into glistening water. He feels lighter, as though the world has given him a secret. It's not just about ice and salt anymore. It's about seeing the extraordinary woven into the fabric of daily life. He feels grateful, not just for the crystals in his hand, but for the lesson they carry. A lesson he will remember every time he sprinkles salt at dinner or walks safely across a salted path in winter. And as the snow continues to fall gently around them, the boy senses that the story is still unfolding. Watching ice fade into water, the boy crouches down on the step, watching the ice surrender to water. At first, it looks like nothing is happening, but then he notices little beads forming, like tears running across the frozen surface. They gather, connect, and flow downward, leaving behind patches of dark stone. To him it feels like witnessing a slow, magic trick. No flash, no sound, just a steady transformation. He leans closer, fascinated by the quiet way ice dissolves into something softer, something freer. It feels like a story of release, unfolding drop by drop. Each bead reflects the lamplight, shimmering like tiny jewels. The boy reaches out with his mitten, brushing across the wetness, and feels the slippery coolness against his skin. The ice that seemed so strong just moments ago is now fragile, retreating in silence. He whispers to himself, "It's letting go." And in that whisper, he feels the truth. Letting go is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is gentle, graceful, and necessary. The puddle that spreads across the stone feels like a lesson, waiting for him to understand. The father stands quietly nearby, watching his son absorb the moment. He doesn't need to explain what is happening anymore. The boy has seen it with his own eyes, and sometimes seeing is more powerful than words. The silence between them carries meaning, like an unspoken agreement that this small moment matters. The boy realizes that life often teaches in whispers, not shouts, and only those who watch closely will hear. He wonders how many people walk across salted steps without noticing this transformation, without seeing the hidden story playing out beneath their feet. How many lives pass by, never stopping to see how ice becomes water, how hardness yields to flow. Tonight, the boy has noticed. And because he has noticed, the world feels different. He feels different. As the last of the ice melts, the boy senses something stirring within him, an understanding that will grow with time. He knows this isn't just about salt and ice. It's about change, about watching old forms dissolve into new ones. And that realization leads him toward the next thought, that science itself is hidden in everyday wonders, waiting to be discovered by anyone who dares to look closer. The wonder in everyday science. The boy realizes something simple yet profound. Science isn't always locked away in laboratories or buried in thick books. It is here on his doorstep, written in salt and ice. Everyday life is full of experiments, full of quiet discoveries, if only we take the time to notice them. He feels a new excitement rising in him, the joy of seeing the world not just as it appears, but as it truly is beneath the surface. Salt-melting ice is not just a chore, it is a doorway into wonder. He remembers other small moments of discovery, how soap makes bubbles float, how shadows grow longer in the evening, how seeds sprout in a jar of damp cotton. All of these felt magical once, but tonight he sees them differently. They are not tricks. They are invitations, inviting him to look closer, to ask questions, to keep wondering. The boy realizes science is not a distant subject. It is a language the world speaks every day, if only he learns how to listen. His father nods, sensing his son's thoughts. "The world is always teaching us," he says. "It hides its lessons in ordinary things." The boy thinks of the salt crystals dissolving, of the water beads forming, and he knows his father is right. The lesson isn't written on a chalkboard. It's written in the steps beneath his boots, in the frozen night that slowly gives way to change. He feels grateful for the chance to see it, to feel it, to know it. He wonders how many other secrets are hiding in plain sight. What else do the stars whisper? What mysteries lie in a falling leaf, a gust of wind, a drop of rain? His imagination stretches outward, reaching beyond the snow-covered street, into the vastness of the world itself. He feels a hunger to keep asking questions, to never stop noticing the invisible stories unfolding around him. Salt has become his first teacher tonight, but he senses there are countless more waiting for him. And in this swell of curiosity, the boy realizes that every transformation carries meaning. The ice melting into water is not just science. It is a mirror of life. Change is everywhere, always happening, often unseen. This thought fills him with quiet awe, leading him deeper into the heart of transformation itself. The child's quiet realization. As he stands on the salted steps, the boy feels something shift inside him. It is not a loud epiphany, but a quiet settling, like snow landing on the earth. He realizes that he is seeing the world differently now. Salt is no longer just seasoning. Ice is no longer just frozen water. Each has become a symbol, carrying truths that stretch far beyond science. He feels both small and infinite at once, part of something larger, yet rooted in this single moment under the winter night. The boy takes a deep breath, watching it puff into the air. His father may not know it, but something important has awakened in him. He understands now that life is full of hidden stories, and the key to hearing them is curiosity. "Why?" he whispers softly, almost to himself. It is the most powerful question he has ever asked, and he knows he will keep asking it again and again for the rest of his life. His father smiles faintly, perhaps sensing the change, though he doesn't speak. The bond between them doesn't need words. It exists in the shared silence, in the crunch of salt beneath their boots, in the glimmer of water on the stone. The boy realizes that some lessons are not taught, but caught, absorbed through presence, through love, through the patience of being seen. Tonight, science and love have woven together in a way he will never forget. He thinks about how many times he has walked these steps before, never noticing the quiet drama of ice and salt. Tonight, those same steps have become a classroom, a temple, a place of awakening. He feels older somehow, as though he has stepped into a new understanding. And yet he is still a child, still filled with wonder, still hungry for more. The balance of innocence and discovery feels beautiful, almost sacred. And as the last crystals dissolve, the boy knows he has taken his first step into a world of endless questions. But beyond science, beyond curiosity, he also senses a truth about life itself, a truth about change, transformation, and the lessons that come from letting go. Lessons in transformation. The boy reflects on what he has seen. Ice, once hard and unyielding, transformed into water with the help of something small. He realizes that transformation is not always about force. Sometimes it's about influence, about introducing something new that changes the balance. Salt did not fight the ice, it simply shifted its story. And isn't that what life does too? Small experiences, small choices, small words, they can all transform us in ways we never expect. He remembers moments when he has changed without realizing it, learning to ride a bike, facing his first day at school, making a new friend. Each seemed ordinary at the time, but looking back, he can see how they melted parts of his old self, freeing him to become something new. Transformation is not always loud. Often it's as quiet as salt dissolving into ice, rewriting the world in silence. The boy feels comforted by this thought, knowing that change doesn't have to be frightening, it can be gentle, natural, necessary. His father places a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the present. "Everything changes," he says. "That's how life moves forward." The boy nods, sensing the truth in his words. He thinks of the trees that lose their leaves, the seasons that turn, the stars that fade and reappear. Change is everywhere, written into the fabric of existence. And now, with salt as his teacher, he feels ready to embrace it. The boy looks at the puddle forming where the ice once was. It reflects his small face, stretched by the lamplight. He wonders what transformations lie ahead for him, what bonds will break, what new forms will emerge. He does not feel afraid. He feels curious, hopeful, even excited. If salt can change ice, then perhaps he too can change when the time is right. And as he gazes at the shimmering water, he feels the lesson settle deep within him. Transformation is not the end of something, but the beginning of something new. This truth shines quietly in his heart, guiding him toward another thought, that salt itself, beyond its science, carries a deeper symbolism in human life. The symbol of salt in life. Salt has always been more than just a mineral. Across cultures and centuries, it has been seen as a symbol of purity, preservation, and even friendship. To share salt at a table was to share trust. To offer it in rituals was to bless and protect. Tonight, on this snowy street, the boy sees yet another meaning in salt. The power to melt what is frozen, to soften what is hard, to keep the path safe for those who walk it. It is both material and metaphor, both science and story. The boy imagines how people in different times saw salt. To some it was sacred, used in offerings to gods. To others it was wealth, traded across deserts and oceans. And now to him it is a teacher, a reminder that the smallest things can hold the deepest meaning. He looks at the white crystals in his palm and feels as though he is holding something more than matter. He is holding history, culture, memory, and love. His father notices the way his son stares at the salt. "It has always meant something to people," he says softly. "It keeps food from spoiling, but it also keeps people together. We even say someone is the salt of the earth, to mean they are good, steady, trustworthy." The boy nods, absorbing the words. He realizes salt is not just useful, it is symbolic of life itself, of what it means to endure, to protect, to give. The thought feels warm in his heart, even against the winter chill. The boy thinks of all the frozen places inside people, the fears, the hurts, the grudges. Perhaps, he wonders, life gives us salt not only for the earth, but for our hearts. Something small, something ordinary, that can soften what is hard, melt what is frozen, and make us safe again. He feels a quiet awe at this thought, as though he has stumbled upon a secret too big for words. He clutches the last grains tightly, as if holding on to wisdom itself. And as the snow continues to fall, he realizes salt is both science and symbol, both tool and teacher. It connects the physical and the spiritual, the everyday and the eternal.